privilege to have you here with us today. You were the Prime Minister of New Zealand for 3 terms. Then you went on to be the head of the UNDP and the first female head of the UNDP. And then Forbes named you the 22nd most powerful woman in the world. When thinking about that as a woman, I want to know, where does that confidence and perseverance come from? Was that something that developed for you as a child?
If I think back to my childhood, I was the eldest of 4 daughters, no brothers. I think that was actually very helpful in the context of 1950s and 60s New Zealand. I grew up on a farm, and where there were boys on farms, boys got to do all sorts of things that girls didn't do. Yeah. But my dad didn't have boys, so as girls we grew up thinking, we would just do whatever we wanted to do. There was no one blocking us. Very, very supportive parents who believed in the power of education for each of us. So I think the home background was extremely important, that self-belief that you could achieve what you wanted to.
Right. And when you decided to run for office, in a situation where you wouldn't see very many female leaders around you at that time, how did you decide to make that decision? Was it someone that urged you to do so?
There were very few women leaders at that time, both in New Zealand and globally. But remember, I was a member of a baby boomer generation. The young women were finishing their schooling, they were going on to tertiary education, and they had expectations and opportunities which previous generations of women didn't have. And we used those opportunities to push open doors that would have been barred before. So we were path breakers, if you like. I first ran for elected office for the Auckland City Council, and at that time there was really quite a rigged system of elections for councils, so there were competing tickets, but it was first past the post, so if one ticket got more votes than the other, they got virtually everyone elected. So I didn't succeed in being elected to local office, but I supported the team effort. And then I began to run for Parliament, first when I was 25, in a constituency which was not winnable for my party, but somebody has to run, and you can use it as a training ground, if you like. And then 6 years later, of course, I was elected to Parliament for a seat my party had long held, and that was the beginning of a 27-and-a-half-year parliamentary career, which culminated with 9 years as Prime Minister.
As a female leader, with so many people depending on you, how do you deal with that responsibility? The reason that I ask is because as a woman in working at the UN and having a team of people that depend on me, I want to know, how do you keep your ego in check? How do you know how to delegate? How do you altogether deal with that responsibility?
Well, firstly, being a woman leader does bring an extra responsibility because there's not many women leaders.
Right.
So you're very conscious that you want to be a successful woman leader and not a failure, because if you're a failure, then that just lets those who are opposed to women in leadership say, oh, look at that, they didn't do very well, women can't hack it. So you do have to meet a much higher standard, in my opinion. But the trick to leadership, I think, is being able to delegate, bring a good team around you, which in the case of leading a government is your cabinet. At UNDP it's your senior management team, and I had a good cabinet, I had a good senior management team. I think you also need to keep very grounded in the reality that these top jobs only run for a certain period. I actually had long runs. I had 9 years as Prime Minister, 8 years, 2 terms as head of UNDP. But at some point you're going to walk out of those positions and you're going to go back to Civvy Street, and you want your family still to be there for you, you want your friends to be there for you. So always keep very, very grounded in the reality that the fast lane doesn't last forever.
Any advice that you would give to young leaders?
So I think women often are much more doubting of their ability to step up to a job at the time than men are. It's often said that women who are 120% qualified say, I'm not ready, and men who are 60% qualified say they're ready. So my main advice to young women is believe in yourself and your capacity and your potential, and if there's a door that you can nudge open and go through, you should nudge that. But you don't try to do it all on your own. You must have alliances, coalitions, support groups. Having family support's important, but strong networks that are going to help carry you forward.
And thank you for that advice. I want to switch gears a little bit to climate action, climate change. At the UNDP, I'm sure you've been well aware of the climate crisis that we're in, not now, but years and years ago. What advice would you give? We have Greta Thunberg, which is a very popular activist, Naomi Klein, which wrote a book on the Green Deal. What advice would you give to people that are looking to be leaders in climate crisis and help with the climate crisis in their community?
This is not a new issue, right?
Right.
If you go back to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, that is where the Convention on Climate Change was actually gavelled through. The Convention on Biodiversity and the Convention on Combating Desertification, and they're all fundamental environmental and climate-related conventions. So I was aware of that. When we were preparing to go into government in the late 90s in New Zealand, the Kyoto Protocol was negotiated, and New Zealand had signed it but hadn't ratified it. One of the first acts of my government was to ratify the Kyoto Protocol and then to have an action plan to meet commitments made under it. And in my last term of office, we had a strategy for New Zealand actually becoming zero carbon, net carbon by 2020. Then another government came along, and of course nothing came of it, but we now have another government in New Zealand that has a zero carbon bill through the Parliament and is working extremely hard on that. So I came from a background of having been very actively involved at the national level in setting strategies. New Zealand can be 100% energy sustainable, renewable. That has implications then for the transport fleet. We can design our cities to be friendlier to walking and cycling. We can make provision for achieving zero waste to landfill, so we don't have methane oozing landfills anymore. There's so many things you can do. Everyone knows what has to be done. It's mustering the political will to do it.
And
that's
the support
the issue.
behind it and the path to get there.
And you have to take the public with you, because prima facie, people will riot over an increase in fuel price. Take the Yellow Vest protests, which started in France with the increase in the diesel tax. So these things have to be carefully planned and implemented, and you always need to protect the poorest people, who often face disproportionate costs from these fuels.
So I hear you saying plan, implement, and protect. And then the last question is that human rights has been such a thread in your entire career. I would say from the very beginning, listening to you speak about your childhood and your upbringing, your perseverance and your confidence. What is it about human rights? What can you share that just draws you in every single time? And how can we implement human rights into our own daily life?
I believe that the dignity of the human being is paramount.
Yeah.
I do not believe any human being should be discriminated against for any factor whatsoever, and that's been a guiding principle of my entire life. Obviously, women's rights are human rights, and yet around the world still so many women don't enjoy those full human rights. The first major human rights campaign I was involved in was the anti-apartheid movement in New Zealand, because apartheid was a major human rights crime, discriminating against people on the basis of race in law. And this was a very big cause in New Zealand to support the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So it has been a touchstone through my life to work for a world where all are free and equal to fulfill their potential, enjoy their full human rights, not have to deal with discrimination of any kind.